Hello everyone, it is such a joy to be back here at PPMD. It's so beautiful to see new faces and meet some old friends. And for those of you who I haven't met, I am delighted to share a little bit of my story with you today. And for those of you who have heard this, it's a little bit different, so hopefully we can all learn from this. My presentation actually builds on what a lot of the last 3 presentations have been about, which is all about communication essentially and powerful questions, asking for help. So this will build on that a little bit. I am originally from New Zealand and I've recently moved to Australia, so that's the accent that you're detecting here. So it was a 32-hour plane ride to get here, which is testament to how much I love being part of your community. It's a very special community. This is something I really deeply believe, the power of words and the power of language, the power of communication, that they are actually a form of action capable of influencing change. And that can be for good or for bad. It can impact us in different ways. But I hope that we don't fear our words, because often our intentions are good, but sometimes what we say doesn't quite land properly. And I don't know how you guys are feeling about this, because there's a lot of different ways that we need to communicate, especially in this new space with Duchenne. The way that we communicate with our families, our partners, our husbands, our sons, the grandparents, our friends, our healthcare professionals is really different. So hopefully this can kind of give us some tips and tools to be able to communicate the things that we need in a way that's going to land for us and for those around us. This is my little daughter Evie Callander. She didn't have Duchenne. She had another very rare chromosomal condition, which is how I actually met Pat a few years ago. We were speaking at a rare disease conference in Switzerland. So while I don't have experience with what you're going through with Duchenne, I know a little bit around the big language, the scary new landscape that you find yourself in, the club you never wanted to be part of, but also the joy that can still be found in the brokenness, the connections that are made, the fact that we still laugh, and that it's good to, we need to hold on to that joy. I remember the first time that I was so impacted by communication with Evie, and it was when she was first born and first diagnosed, and the first words that I heard from the healthcare professionals were really confronting. They were scary, big, dehumanizing often. Words like dysmorphic features, skeletal abnormalities, defects, retardation. You might recognize some of these words, and they hurt, right? They hurt. And it's part of our diagnosis language, but it's not part of a humanity language. A lot of the words that we use to describe Evie didn't feel like they were describing a human being, and you might resonate with that too. And then there were the strangers who would meet Evie for the first time. And as you can see, she looks a little bit different. But the first thing often strangers would ask me was, "What's wrong with your child?" I don't know how many people have had that experience in your life. What's wrong with your child? I hated this question, because what I was left with was that diagnosis language. So I'd kind of brace myself in preparation to answer, and I'd say, well, she's got partial trisomy 9 and partial monosomy 6, and she can't walk and she can't talk, and she's got multiple ventricular septal defects. And the stranger would kind of glaze over. And I just felt this chasm of fear opening up between us. And I hated this. I couldn't tell them a single thing about my child because that question was wrong. What's wrong with your child? And it wasn't until I discovered a new way of speaking up for her that could celebrate her humanity. And it was all about the unique, beautiful things about her. I called them her superpowers, but it was a way for me to kind of describe Evie as a human child. So the next time someone asked me, "What's wrong with your child?" with this new language that I had, I could answer things like, well, she loves being on a beanbag. There's nothing wrong with her. She loves water. She's a beautiful human. She can't talk, but she can communicate everything that she needs with me. She's a magical human being. I love being her mum. Yes, it's challenging and hard, but she's brilliant. She evokes a level of care and love in people they hadn't expressed before. And when I described my daughter using this kind of language, these kind of words, they then saw a human being rather than a collection of failing body parts or something to be afraid of. And then that stranger could see Evie and they'd say things like, "Oh, isn't she beautiful?" And in that moment, we'd built a bridge over this chasm of fear, and we called it acceptance and inclusion and love. Despite this newfound kind of empowerment that I had as a parent, being able to describe my child using humanity words rather than diagnosis or illness words, I was constantly forced into a space of hopelessness or powerlessness, and you guys might have experienced this too. Anytime you need to fill out any form describing your child's abilities, or IEPs, I think in America. Yeah, I can see some nods in the back, the dreaded IEPs. And they're important documents, but they can focus so heavily on what your child can't do. And that can wear you down. It really can. It can wear you down because you can see the abilities and magicness in your child, their awesomeness. But when you're having to fill out these official documents, it can really hurt, it can break you. I remember having to fill out one of these documents myself with Evie, and I just hated it. And it broke me. It was a really low point in my time as being Evie's mum, because I got the sense that the person at the other end reading this document, that they would think that Evie was a child that couldn't do anything, that she had no value, that she was a blob costing the system a lot of money, which of course wasn't true. So I decided to make up my own form to go alongside this very official negative document, and I'm sharing it with you, and you might have heard this before, but I think it's a really important thing to keep sharing. I keep sharing this in the hopes that one day these forms will have much better questions on them. I called the form that I made up Evie's Awesomeness, as a way to celebrate her. And basically what this form was a series of questions about Evie that I could already answer yes to. Things that I could tick. So this form looks quite beautiful now. It's been through a few iterations. The very first iteration was basically just a Word document with Times New Roman font, so boring. But honestly, this piece of paper gave me so much hope and joy and empowerment, because as I answered these questions about Evie and her abilities, and as you can see, some of them are quite random. You know, does your child laugh when objects fall near her face? Yes, put a big tick beside that one. I got so excited answering these questions because I could see that she was growing and developing in her own way, in her own time, completely her. This document became a measuring stick that I used only against herself. Because in this space of Duchenne, normal doesn't exist. It doesn't exist anyway, but often our children, ourselves, are measured against this elusive normal, and it does nothing but damage. It hurts our hearts. It helps that negative feedback loop when we're trying to measure ourselves against normal. It can cause us to do so much damage to ourselves when they tell us that we're not good enough, because the measuring sticks that we're using are just the wrong ones. What if we used measuring sticks just for ourselves, to measure against only ourselves? I think the world would be a much kinder place if we could do that. But for a start, we can use it with our children, measuring them only against themselves. And it's a beautiful thing, because then their personality, their character, their identity is revealed. And those things are so crucial to inform things like IEP documents. You need to know those things about your children. Everybody needs to know those things about your children so that they can have access to the support and care that they need. I love sharing the idea of awesomeness forms, so please take photos of anything that you see in my presentation that's useful. I've shared this concept all over the world, all over the place, into other rare disease spaces, and we've made awesomeness forms for all kinds of beautiful children. And they're really hard to read slides, I'm so sorry, but I just love to read a few of them. These are awesomeness forms that the mums and dads have made in workshops with me. So looking at pedo, the first question, does your child know the words to Drunken Sailor by the Irish Rovers? Yes. And his mum put a big tick beside that. How great is that? Does your child love water more than a fish? Yes. Does your child have an amazing imagination? Yes. Like, aren't these questions beautiful? Aren't they powerful? Rather than, can your child roll over? I mean, that's important. I know, I get it. But this stuff is really powerful too. The heart and the identity and the real humanity of these children. I'm going to keep going. Look at these beautiful kids and all of their awesomeness, and they're only being measured against themselves. I'm going to share a quick story about Max there on the end. He has a condition called SCN8A, and this was part of the SCN8A community. And we did this workshop about creating awesomeness forms, and this was Max's one. And then a few months after we made these forms as a community, it was all online, Max's mum emailed me and she said, I don't know if you remember me, but I was part of your workshop group and I just want to tell you what's happened with Max's awesomeness form. Max had ended up in hospital in a pretty severe way. He wasn't breathing so well and he was in the ICU and things were looking pretty dire. And so she reached out to her community. She said, I don't know what to do. I'm falling apart here. I'm really struggling. And they said, why don't you print out his awesomeness form? And so she printed out this form as an A2 piece of paper and stuck it on the window of that ICU where Max was. And the mum, she shared with me, as soon as she did that, everything shifted in that hospital room, that ward. The doctors started talking nicer to each other. The nurses spoke kindly to each other. They spoke more kindly to Max and to the parents, because it was almost like they got to know who Max was, who they were fighting for, rather than a body part that wasn't quite working. There was the holistic picture of this beautiful life. And then other people heard about this and they started coming up from all sorts of departments to read Max's awesomeness. That's the power of words. That's the power of communication. When we can reveal who we are to one another, despite whatever's going on, despite our condition, that's not important. It's our humanity that shines through. You can't be diagnosed with your identity. A diagnosis forms how you will experience your life, but it's not who you are. And when a lot of these diagnosis and illness words are spoken over a person, words like dysmorphic, retarded, mutated, defective, spastic, geriatric, all the other ones, there's a whole list of them, disabled even, it's got a different energy about it, right? If those words are spoken over you enough in your life, you'll start to believe that that's who you are. And that isn't true. You are the person who loves water more than fish, if you are that person. You are so many things. You are the person who is studying for a law degree. Ravi, I love that. You are so much more than your diagnosis. And we need to be able to share these things as parents when we're talking about our sons. As people living with Duchenne, we need to be able to say, I'm not just this, I'm so much more. I've got so much going on. I'm interested in so many things. And when we're talking about the things that we need and how to communicate with each other and build community, I think we need to ask really good questions of each other. I'm an ex-wedding and portrait photographer from a very small town in New Zealand, and I now work as a healthcare communication consultant. So usually those two skill sets don't generally blend together, but because of my life with Evie and all of the things that she taught me, This is now what I do. I teach healthcare professionals and industry representatives and anyone working with patients and families how to communicate in a way that doesn't add unnecessary harm. Because I'm sure that your diagnosis stories, there's some trauma there. It's a hard thing to have to go through. So these 4 questions, I guess, form some of the foundations of the work that I share with healthcare professionals, but it has implications in all relationships. I think everyone needs to be asked these 4 questions because it speaks to our humanity, it speaks to dignity and vulnerability and capability and our humanity. So what I do in workshops with healthcare professionals, I get them to come up with as many different ways of asking those 4 questions. Because as they stand, they're often too big. And to the panel's point, when we're talking about asking for help, sometimes if someone asks us, what do you need? You're like, there's a few ways you can answer this. It's like, I don't know, or I'm fine, I don't need anything, or what have you got, I'll take it all, kind of thing. Like, it's too big. Until you kind of know what someone's offering you, then you can decide if that's helpful or not. But what do you need is kind of confronting. It's like we need to know these things before somebody asks that. And even what are you afraid of? We're all walking around with a lot of very known, very unspoken fears that often we're too afraid to even bring them up. But those fears are the things that we need to share so people can come around us and support us. But asking what are you afraid of is, again, it's too big a question. And sometimes what do you hope for can be quite big too, because we hope for so much. So I get these healthcare professionals to come up with as many different ways of asking those questions, to break them down, to make them safer, to make them a little bit easier to answer. And I don't expect you to read this, I just wanted to give you this effect because these are a whole lot of different ways of asking that one question, what are you proud of? It's pretty amazing when these people have really thought into the space, how else could I ask this to connect with them? A really great one, if there are any healthcare professionals in the room, a really great question to ask is, what's working for you already? How can we improve on that? And as a parent, wouldn't you love to be asked that kind of question? It's like, well, actually, we're doing really great at this, but this thing we could probably improve a wee bit. That'd be helpful. You're really aligning what you know with what somebody needs. And then look at this one. Oh, what do you hope for? These are all the different ways that these people have come up with asking this question. So many different ways. What are you afraid of? Again, I don't expect you to read them all. I've got a little exercise coming up. And then what do you need? I love that this has got the most. How many different ways can we ask, what do you need, to make it safer? So what I've done is I've just kind of picked out a few questions from each category. And I wonder, this could be like a little homework if you want. You can take photos of these slides if you like, because what I've learned from working in this community for a number of years now is that it's really hard to communicate with those around you. Husbands and wives, partners, parents, they absorb information differently from each other. And if we don't talk about it, we don't know what each other's going through. Have you had conversations with your spouse like this? Have you asked these kinds of questions with each other? Have you asked these kind of questions of your sons or of your friends? So I just wonder if it feels good, if you'd like to take some of these questions away and practice them on your family, on your friends, on your partners, maybe it could bring some sense of connection and community. So what are you proud of? What makes you feel you are your best you? And maybe even as a community, we can ask these questions of each other over the course of the next few days. You might pick a favourite question to ask somebody, ask a stranger, ask a friend. What brings you joy? What is something good that happens in your day? And what is something you feel you've had success with or achieved? What are you looking forward to? What is important for you, your child, your family? When you leave here, what is one thing you'd like to have achieved, put in place, started or finished? And if you feel safe to, I encourage you to find someone that you feel good around. What concerns you the most? What are the most challenging parts of your day? What doesn't feel right or make sense? It's so important to talk about these things with each other. And we've been talking about belonging, we've talked about community, we've talked about things that we need, asking for help. And I think having the courage to ask these questions of ourselves and of those around us is a really good place to start. Again, healthcare professionals, these are beautiful questions to ask of the families in front of you. Is anything missing that can be added to make things better? What makes your day harder than it needs to be? What would be most helpful for you and your family? Do you need to change anything? This is an interesting quote. This is actually my father-in-law. This is one of his kind of mantras or mottos. And it's interesting because it's true and it's also not at the same time. Not all help is helpful. Sometimes when people desperately want to help you, they will assume what you need. And so they give you things and then you feel obligated to receive that help. And then there's a sort of like an expectation that you thank them for the help. But what if what they're giving you isn't what you need at all? How do you say that I don't need that without hurting their feelings? It creates this barrier to connection. We can't be honest about this. And during some of the Lighthouse groups, I'll talk about that in a minute, we had a conversation that kind of divided the groups. And it was around, you know, when awful things happen and people don't know what to do, they just kind of bandy together and they throw help on you. And we were talking about food trains and how some people love food trains. You know, people need food when bad things happen or hard things happen. And then other parents in that group said, I hate food trains because they don't make the food that I like, and and I end up throwing away the food because it's not what I wanted. And so therefore there's that miscommunication, that misalignment of needs is actually really unhelpful. So the intent is good, but because we haven't been able to communicate what we actually need, it misses the point, it misses the mark, and it doesn't feel like help at all. So it's really important that we know what we need and we know who to ask. And the panel spoke to this significantly because we feel like our needs are a burden to somebody else. Especially when the things that we're so used to being capable of doing, all of a sudden, with everything else that's going on, you can't manage everything in your day. Again, when we were talking with the mums in the Lighthouse groups, they said, well, I can do the laundry and I can make the dinners and I can do these things. I should be able to still do these things. But with everything else going on, I can't, and I feel like I'm failing everyone. But what if our needs weren't a burden? What if our needs actually creates an opportunity for those around us to support us and love us and care for us deeply? And as we heard in the panel, people are actually desperate to want to help. They want their care to be known. They want their love to be shared and expressed. I think sometimes we feel a little bit like this plant. There's a whole lot of cracks everywhere. Sometimes it's amazing where things can grow from. And to your beautiful presentation earlier, Chris, sometimes we need space, we need seeds, we need the water, we need so much from each other. Otherwise we will just be those cracks, but we can grow. We are so resilient when we are together, when we support each other. I don't know how I'm going for time, Pat. I have no idea what the time is. It's 5 minutes? What? I'm just borrowing someone's phone up here. Okay, great. I think it's yours, Alpa. I'd love to talk about the Lighthouse groups for a little minute. because we are running them again. And if you're interested in being part of this, please email me. My address will be at the end of this slide. But I wanted to share with you a little bit about what they are. And it was a group for mums, and it's not to exclude the dads on purpose. It's just because mums and dads need very different things often. And mums, they carry the family in a lot of ways, in many ways. They're the ones that know a lot about the kids' medical conditions, all their treatments, all the equipment, all of the phone numbers that need to be called. They hold so much together, and they often feel like they're not allowed to be weak. They feel like they can't fall apart. They have to stay strong for everybody. Their own self, their own identity, their own needs are put right to the end of the list of priorities. I can see some nods in the room. So this group was for the mums. And it was beautiful. We came together every week, and we're still learning how to do this well. We've run a couple of pilots, and they've been beautifully successful, and we're constantly changing and growing how we're evolving this concept. But it's to build belonging, build connection, build that safety that Brandon was talking about, those social connectors. And as you can see, it was pretty powerful. One of the mums said, "I've learned how to ask for help." I'm like, that's huge. And we laughed, and we cried. And it is just a space to have some time out to reflect, to be a mum, to talk to each other, to connect, to share those hard things with each other, to hold each other, hold that space. So if you're interested in being part of these groups, this is my email address, and you can also talk to the front desk, I'm sure, and we'll be sending out information to the whole community anyway. It'll probably happen in the fall. We're making things up as we go generally here, but it's happening, and we'll figure it out. But I wanted to encourage you to really be courageous with your vulnerability. This space that you find yourself in, this community, if you're here for the first time and it's overwhelming, I encourage you to find one face, one person. Just say, "Hi, I'm new, this is overwhelming, I don't know what to do." Someone will probably give you a hug, and that person will probably become your new best friend. I really encourage you to put yourself out there, to be brave. You've made it all the way here. That's huge. The power of this community is incredible. I met a mum today who said, being here right now is like, I feel like energy has just been put into my veins. What a beautiful testament to the power of us in this community. Hopefully this has been a little bit helpful and useful, and you can draw on some of the things that everyone's been sharing today. And I do encourage you to ask those questions of yourself. Share them with your family, with your partners, and see what happens. Thank you so much. I'm around all weekend. Please come chat, come say hi, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the sessions. Thank you so much.
That was wonderful.